South Africa may be looking for as much as 95 billion rand from multilateral organizations. This comes as the nation turns to the International Monetary Fund, World Bank and New Development Bank, also known as the BRICS Bank, to finance the relief package for COVID-19. The loans from the lenders are available only for COVID-19 related measures, which means that the government wouldn't need to adhere to strict loan agreements as conditions. Last week, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a relief plan aimed at cushioning the blow for the local economy due to the spread of the coronavirus, which has all but stopped trading across the globe. The package includes a 200 billion rand loan guarantee program, tax relief measures and 130 billion rand that will be reprioritized from existing budgets. National Treasury is expected to table a new budget for the financial year. So as we've just said, President Cyril Ramaphosa last week announced a 500 billion rand relief package to assist South Africa deal with the coronavirus. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has said a combination of fiscal and monetary policy packages brought that amount to around 800 billion rand. Dondo, who's the Director General of National Treasury, joins me via Skype. Thanks so much for your time on SABC News. So South Africa is looking for about 95 billion rand from external lenders. Can you break down where that's going to be coming from and how far along you are in that process with the different lenders?
$95 billion, yes. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to viewers. It will be $4.2 billion from the International Monetary Fund, $1 billion from the New Development Bank, and about $50 million from the World Bank. And these are all COVID-related 19 allocations. We are in discussions currently with them. Talking about we have to sign agreements with them. They have to go through to their board process and approval process, and we hope as soon as possible, when the discussions are over, we'll be able to get this money coming our way. We know that every time this issue has been raised of external lending, in particular political parties, the ANC, the EFF, say that there is no need for going to those funders because of their history, despite the fact that there's been a reiteration, particularly with the IMF, that there's only going to be 1% interest, and saying that there can be more reprioritization of funds and funds sought internally. How do you respond to that? We will. There's not enough. There's not enough because in dealing with the pandemic, in making sure that we are able to meet all our obligations as a country, we have to obviously continue looking for cheap money out there. And what these three institutions in particular do will give us very affordable loans without actually going into the capital market in a big way. Because if you remember, we were downgraded the other day, and getting to the weak B, getting out of the weak B index, it means then South Africa is finding very difficult to actually get cheap loans out there. But the reality is that these are going to be cheap loans. We are then forced also to reprioritize from within budgets, about 130 billion rand reprioritization, 100 billion from provinces, and about 30 billion from 30 from provinces and 100 billion from national departments. This reprioritization will essentially say stop those projects that are not priority for now, convert and redirect those to interventions that we need to ensure that the pandemic is contained. And I think in doing this, we'll be acting responsibly and making sure that we don't indebt future generations. So when will we be tabling that supplementary budget with those reprioritized spending areas and a little bit more clarity about what you've just told me? We are currently in discussion with Parliament and parliamentary presiding officers. We are going to the select committee and joint committees next week. The idea here is that we want to do that as soon as possible because we cannot, as you can imagine, wait for October, where we would normally table the adjusted budget. We want to bring that early so that we give certainty to spending and ensure that we spend within, we give departments the authority and the legal authority to spend without actually worrying about any kind of irregular or unauthorized spending. So we'll be going to Parliament very soon once we have the dates and we have firmed up the process to get us to Parliament. Do we at this point have any idea of how long it's going to take South Africa to recover from dealing with COVID-19 as well as our other challenges? Because I know BNP Paribas has said it may take us around 6 years to recover. Look, nobody knows as yet. Nobody knows the impact that coronavirus will have on South Africa. We're still in the early stages. We're still trying to make sure that we test as much as we can to kind of have an idea in terms of where this is going. So I think we have to give ourselves time to understand the impact, but whilst at the same time planning and we are doing that exactly. We had a very detailed discussion this morning with the economic ministers where they were giving us direction in terms of areas that we should be looking at, focused areas that we should actually be spending money on, including necessary interventions that are needed in a post-COVID environment. So it may take that long according to BNP Paribas, but however, we're saying we want to actually ensure that we turn around the economy and the impact that this has much, much bigger than expected.
I'm glad you brought up also looking forward and planning ahead so that future generations aren't crippled. The last global crisis in 2008 saw our economy shrinking by 1.8%, and as a result of that, there was about a 3% fall in tax revenue collection. Is it correct to assume that with the Reserve Bank saying that the South African economy is going to contract by around 6%, we can at least see that percentage fall in terms of tax revenue as well? And what's going to be done to mitigate that area in particular and financing the shortfall of those tax revenues?
The current findings of the tax revenues will be filled by this gap where we have to borrow more. So there's definitely going to be an impact in terms of our borrowing requirement. There's going to be definitely an impact on the finances in our interest, in the interest that we have to pay. So expect that our debt will obviously increase, the details of which we'll announce later once we know exactly how much the impact is going to be. So yes, economic activity, lockdown has direct impact on tax revenues, and we expect that this will have a significant implication on the fiscal framework as is. That's why it's important to then rearrange our spending, to rearrange spending in such a way that we actually divide spending according to that, which will make impact on the COVID pandemic interventions, including setting aside money and resources to actually use as a springboard to actually boost the economy for actual tax revenues to be realized, because a growing economy means more tax revenues, means more jobs, and means more interventions insofar as alleviations of poverty is concerned. So I think we have to balance all of these, and it's not easy once clearly you don't know what the impact of COVID is going to be. But I can guarantee you and guarantee South Africans that we are working flat out with all economic, cluster officials and colleagues to make sure that we address the challenges that are needed, including all those reforms that we committed to in the February budget, ensure that we actually speed them up as soon as COVID is over, and planning for the implementation, because that's quite important. We are known not to implement, and I think it's important that implementation should be on everyone's lips to ensure that we implement all of the programs that will boost the economy to grow and that will ensure that our people get much needed jobs.
Let's talk about those reforms. What are the biggest structural reforms that you plan to focus on? And does COVID-19 then delay the implementation of those 5 focus areas that Minister Mboweni spoke about a while ago?
Definitely, COVID-19 is delaying all of those, but most of them were captured. In fact, all of them, not all, but many of them were captured in the paper that we issued last year, which was a paper towards economic growth for Southern Africa. Now, all of those things, whether it's network industries, whether it's ensuring that we ease the cost of doing business in South Africa, releasing spectrum, we've just released spectrum on a limited basis the other day. All of those things are critical. The telecom sector, the transport sector, ensuring that there's a single transport economic regulator, ports entry, ensuring that the Durban port and other ports in South Africa actually are, we ensure that these ports will ease the in and the outflow and the inflows of goods as they come into our country. All of those things become relevant and important. I think it is very necessary that we have then conversations with various role players in these various sectors that will actually help us to understand what the bottlenecks are. As government, we are able then to unblock those bottlenecks and open up trade, open up communications to flourish in a way that the economy will be boosted.
Let's talk about procurement as we close off. One, there have been light-hearted comments that in about 5 years there's going to be a commission of inquiry into what happened to the COVID funds. But more seriously, National Treasury has issued an instruction in terms of Section 76 of the PFMA to look at how procurement should be done in terms of COVID-19 related goods and centralized. Can you explain that to us and then talk about also the checks and balances to ensure that there isn't widespread corruption and there isn't looting when it comes to a very important matter?
Firstly, we recognize that it's important to issue procurement regulations that recognizes COVID-19. We did that. There are essentially three aspects that are important. Firstly, goods should be goods that are certified by the World Health Organization and by our own Department of Health, so that we ensure that those surgical masks, those shields, those overshoes, and everything that's needed as PPE is in line with the requirements. That's number one. We must ensure. Second, we must also ensure that those who supply these goods are vetted. They are part of the central supplier database, and that finally the price that they are charged is in line with acceptable price levels, and that departments, as they procure based on the guidelines that we have given. It's important that they stick to the price ranges. You can imagine if a mask is costing 12 rand, there's no need and there's no way that suppliers can actually supply these masks as 25 rands when the average price is 12 rand. So we'll ensure that accounting officers and CFOs and supply chain officials in various government departments and entities make sure that they buy these masks and buy this equipment as per dictated by our Treasury instructions. That's number one. The second important thing, I think, we are in conversation with the AG. I personally had conversation with Mr. Kimi in the last few days, whereby we have to put systems in place, not after the fact, the next year sometime, no, now, whereby he'll have his officers on the ground, in departments, in checking on systems. We had a very, we had a discussion yesterday among some of the economic cluster officials, whereby on a daily basis, and some of the recommendations that were given to us was that on a daily basis, we should ensure that we get reports of what people buy and what people spend on and what prices they are paying, so that when there are deviations and there are clear areas where there's instances where officials are not acting in terms of the required standards, that we are able to intervene and get in immediately and correct the situation and not after the effect. It's important that spending that has to do with COVID-19 should actually be done above board. That I think we are emphasizing, and we want to ensure that all departments and entities comply with the regulations that we've issued. That will be issuing again this afternoon. We're issuing some regulations that further regulates how these procurement should be conducted in a way that we recognize transparency, in a way that we recognize fairness, and in the way that we give equal opportunity for everyone who can supply these things, so long as they meet the standards that are stipulated by the Department of Health, and also follow the prices that we have set aside. So it's important that we keep watch of all of those processes. Together with our teams and the Auditor General, will ensure that there's no mismanagement of funds insofar as COVID-19 spending is concerned.
Thank you very much for your time on SABC News this afternoon. Dondo Mogajane, who is the Director General at National Treasury, joining me via Skype there.